Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Enrique. Dear colleagues, thank you very much for the invitation. Well, I can see a whole array of people here. I have some very fond memories of these people, with a few differences in the memories that I have of the people. Now, allow me just to make a few comments on the question of the refugee issue. Because I'm sure you pretty much know what it's all about. I just want to bring out a few key ideas, a few main statements and theses. This is a crisis which is not going to be overcome using normal procedures in a few years' time. I think this is a change in the times, if you like. The times are changing. We can either stay afloat as Europeans or we can go under. Why? Because we have two scenarios that are outside of our control, yet which are going to have a big implication on the way this pans out. We have 60 million refugees on this planet, and these refugees can communicate in a way that they couldn't in the past. A 20-year-old sitting in a town in Eritrea knows what is happening elsewhere in the world. They know that Europe has 50% of world trade, 25% of world assets, and huge expenditure in social welfare. So that's one factor. They know that they either go there, or the second option for them is to possibly be incarcerated by a dictator in their country that's been on the throne, if you like, for some 30 years. Now, I personally would choose Europe out of those two options. Now, the situation in Africa, which is partially being dealt with by the climate conference in Paris at the moment, is one of great drama. Islamic terror as well. We're seeing terror with violent social consequences. From Pakistan to Nigeria, we're seeing a broad array of terror around the world. And at the same time, we know that this is all tied up with the question of scarcity of water, climate change, and other economic and social problems, partly because of our false or wrong trade and fisheries policy undertaken in Germany and other European countries. Now, in addition to that, in Syria and Iraq and elsewhere in the world, we have wars going on. A war with diverse causes. It's not just because of an individual incident that's happened. It's about the artificial borders that were drawn up many years ago, the fact that we entered Iraq in an idiotic war with terrible consequences, and various other mistakes that were made somewhere along the line. The fact that for many years Russia tried to stop a UN resolution going through out of its own interest to try to stop the situation in Syria being sorted out. Also, a proxy war being fought elsewhere through Riyadh and Tehran intervening in Syria. Not to mention the double-faced policy of Turkey and our so-called friends in Qatar. At the same time, we've got Real Madrid and Barcelona being supported by Emirates and Qatar. Well, in any case, that's by the by. So 12 million refugees are in and around Iraq without any prospects, And at the same time, we've made some serious mistakes, including my own country. 2.5 million refugees are in Turkey. Recently, Turkey said, unless you get here quickly and sort it out, they're all going to die. He said that. And he's also said another point. Why should I help 2.5 million refugees when you're shutting up shop? And at the same time, as member states of the European Union, on average, at the beginning of the year, we cut by 40% our provision for food for these people. In some cases up to 100%, but my country made 40% cuts. If it wasn't my country, I could have poked more fun at them. But these are the facts. And this all came to be in about 4.5 months. First the opening of the borders, then came the news that people in the camps were having to live off 800 calories a day. That was the amount of food provision they were being given. And that's the situation. So it's not easy from a logistical perspective, particularly the fact that the Greek islands are serving as a kind of buffer region. But if I see what's going on in Germany and elsewhere, and I see a country like Poland claiming overcapacity when they've got 7,000 refugees coming to their country, compare that with Lebanon, 4 million inhabitants and 1.5 million refugees. It's almost impossible to appreciate the scale of those figures. Why are these people leaving their homes? Well, look at Lebanon. This same proxy war that's going on in Syria and Iraq is happening in Lebanon as well. For a year and a half, they've had no president, and they've got this idea that their president should be a Christian. However, the two Christian parties can't come to an agreement on a candidate. One's looking towards Riyadh, the other one looking more towards Iraq. They've tried to come to agreement on several occasions, but after 4 months of negotiations, they can't come to a preferred candidate. So even that is a proxy war of sorts. So unless we get to the roots of the problem, we won't get anywhere. That's why the Vienna talks are of such importance. Firstly, the international community is beginning to understand that IS represents a threat to everybody. The Turks have realized that they cannot stop the caliphate themselves. Erdogan has his own problems with Assad and the Kurds. The royal family in Riyadh have understood it, that the theology of the situation is such that they've dragged their feet for a long time, but they realise now that they have to do something as well. Tehran is worried about Assad and Baghdad. Russia is worried about the Muslim republics in Russia. There are 4,000 Chechen fighters that have gone to IS and have gone over to Syria, and at the same time Russia has made its own mistakes when it comes to military power. And in Europe we're saying we don't want any more migrants. We've seen 4,000 Chechens, but we've got 5,000 Europeans, not migrants, people with German, Belgian, French, Danish passports that have gone to Syria to fight, people who were born in these countries. So of the 30,000 fighters that they've got, some 9,000 come from Russia and Europe. So for that reason, when Europe, Russia and America come to an agreement, if you look at the common denominator there, you've got Turkey, Iran and Saudi Arabia as well. They all have to be involved in this struggle. And it seems obvious that we should say our enemy number one, our common denominator, is IS. If you look at the reactions to the brutal attacks in Paris and the shooting down or the bombing of the Russian aircraft over Sinai, this helped heighten people's awareness of the situation. But what we have to do now is ensure a ceasefire between the Assad and rebel forces and turn our attentions towards IS, and at the same time we sort out these conflicts between Assad and the rebel forces, trying to get a ceasefire to go from a 6-month period to an 18-month period later on of ceasefire in order to tackle IS and turn our attentions for a moment away from Assad. Now, we need a common strategy, and that's why we need our neighbours. Without neighbours, we can't stop Islamic State getting its funding, because they're still selling oil at the moment. They've had a lot of exchanges with Turkey already, and I'm not sure whether or not things have stopped since Putin's or the Russian aircraft was downed, whether he's said, well, I'll carry on trading with them nonetheless, or whether he's stopped since then. But I can't understand it. These oil transports require oil trucks and merchandising. They need support. How is it possible to get these trucks out and to sell this oil if no one is willing to buy it? There's a huge taboo and secrecy around what's being sold and bought around the Mediterranean region, and that's another issue that has to be sorted out. Obviously nothing can be done without a proper UN mandate, so we have to dry them out financially, put them under military pressure, and then ask ourselves what the Turks and the Kurds are doing to try to ensure a ceasefire in the region and to turn all attentions towards IS. And this is a way of indicating to them that it's a lost cause and has to be stopped. And I think what we have to focus on is the foreign fighters that come from Europe. One of the key points, selling points of IS were that they were so triumphalist and filling people with the idea of glory for fighting for IS. They had teachers telling people that they were meant for greater duties, and they were focused on this triumphalism, and this was their way of advertising their cause. And you can see that all over the social network. If you can stop that happening, then you can perhaps stop their access to new fighting forces. It's a long process. There's a long-term strategy that needs to be put in place. But this is the only way of ending the cause of the flows of refugees. And this is not something that I think just as a German, but the beginning was the 30-Year War. At the time, there were Protestants, Catholics, and so on. Now it's mainly just Sunnis and Shiites. It was all about Vienna, Paris, and Stockholm a while ago, who were using this as a conflict. Now it seems to be Tehran or Riyadh, or Ankara, but the struggle is essentially the same. And unless you bring all of these forces together in a very complicated chess maneuver, then we won't get any further. And that's why I think these talks are so important. And the first point perhaps we should look at with the refugees is the camps. We have to make sure the deal that we agreed upon with the Turks works. Now, you can curse Turkey all you want. You could say we're being blackmailed. You could have said that earlier, before this deal was reached. But the situation is as it is. And I think 3 billion people, in order to improve people's life over there and to make things better, is a lot cheaper than having to deal with this flood of refugees if we don't help them in situ. So I do understand, or rather I don't understand what people are coming out with in some political circles when they complain about this deal with Turkey. Otherwise, if we don't deal with it in Turkey, then we leave the whole thing open when it comes to visa liberalisation and so on. We're never going to get anywhere with that. And even before the refugee crisis, I was all for opening the energy chapter, trying to promote rule of law and trying to stop people being locked up, human rights activists and so on. They won't make the next step towards membership unless they sort that out. But in order to pass the accession process, you need to unanimously open and close the negotiating chapters around 74 times. So you have to open chapters, negotiate them, close them, get assent from Parliament. Then you get the 28 member states' parliaments that also have their right to feed in. So on the 7th or 8th time round, if Turkey hasn't improved, then it won't be able to accede. So whenever we talk about opening up potential accession for Turkey, this rhetoric comes back, but I think it's simply a question of sorting things out from the beginning. Now, of course, we shouldn't breach the Refugees Convention. We should stick to that, as well as taking all of the quotas and the contingencies we've worked out, helping Turkey sort out the situation. The 400,000 that we take on has to be split up in the way that it has been agreed, but obviously not the millions that some people are talking about. And we also have to be willing to have good, sensible external border controls, not leaving things to the Italians or the Maltese or whatever. This is a debate that's gone on many times in this House, but making sure it's done properly and with European support. The Amsterdam Treaty said that there should be a European Coast Guard. And now the people who wanted that and who argued for that have been proven justified. And the minister who argued for that at the time was a very forward-thinking person. And also, some people are saying the whole thing's going down the pan and Schengen's going to have to be dissolved and so on and so forth. The new Commission, particularly with Frattini, the Vice President, 11 years ago, suggested that the Balkan countries, as accession countries, would make a lot more progress. Now in Paris, in Berlin, a lot of other capitals, they said, no way, this is a question of competences of the European Union. We have to do this at national level. Now, no party can hide from this. Everyone was on board with this in Germany. The first case, it was a red-green coalition in Germany, and it was a black-red and black-yellow coalition in Germany. 5 years ago, the Commission proposed having a broad regulation on Lampedusa, and between that original proposal and the following April, negotiations were brought in on that, but then there was a massive U-turn. Not all countries went along with this U-turn. They thought it was a lack of morals and a lack of ethics. Now, so often these U-turns come about because people lose heart in these projects. We talked about this in Budapest. Now, I'm sure from your work you know that the old saying that when the sun shines, it shines in Brussels in Amsterdam, Berlin, London, wherever, when it's raining, it's because of Brussels. The towns and cities tend to complain about the national level. The nations complain about Brussels. That's just the way it is. That's the way you divide up the work. And at the end of the day, it's whoever argues most loudly that seems to win the day. And that's the situation that we face now. You must have experienced this yourself. People have said, even in Strasbourg last week, that we have to put the borders back in place. If people want to travel from one country to another to carry merchandise, for example, that would be a huge cost to the single market and to goods transport. I think we won't have gained anything from that. And in my opinion, the refugee crisis will remain in place. I think it's rather illusory to think that's going to solve the problem. It's a populist argument. It's something that you might sooner ask Father Christmas for, a solution to the refugee problem. And particularly when it comes to the Schengen situation. Smugglers, asylum seekers, criminals, terrorists, drug peddlers, all of them can get to a machine-readable border point with a machine-readable passport. That can happen. But normal citizens will have to go through difficult border controls. It won't stop any of the criminals and the drug peddlers, but it will impede the circulation of normal citizens. And it's simply putting the blame on the wrong parties. Now, this is a case like the financial crisis, where we have a crisis in Europe that wasn't generated inside Europe. 5 years ago, we had a crisis. In 2008, we had a crisis, which we've been trying to resolve now, trying to put instruments in place to try and stop it happening again. If we had put these instruments and systems in place before 2008, all of this wouldn't happen as it did in 2008. And again, this happens in member states. They refuse to take the necessary steps, and then when things collapse, Europe is given the blame. So I think that describes the situation to a certain extent. I think we have to distance ourselves a little from this kind of attitude. I think when people start coming from Africa, it's going to have a whole new dimension and scale of difficulty than people from the Near East. Every individual home would have to be used to house people if they came from there. This at the moment is not a war, but it's a quasi-war. We have to teach people that migrants and terrorists are not the same people. Migrants and refugees are coming here today to flee from the kind of terror that we saw in Paris and elsewhere. But we seem to have discussions going along parallel lines in many cases. I think it's now time to draw up those strands of argument and try to at least overcome some of those false arguments. I don't think we're going to be able to solve this problem if we say we're going to continue to do what we've done to date, but it has to be financed from the top down. No, we have to tell people the truth, that this is a long-term process and it's going to require a long-term strategy, and it's going to take us all working together to solve it. We're expecting to see a doubling of the population of the Earth in the next few decades. That's going to have a huge dramatic consequence for the environment when all these people are looking for something to eat. There are plenty of Greens here, I'm sure, who would agree, but we have to put some thought into provision of food. And perhaps modified products would be a solution to that. Perhaps we should put some thought into whether or not modified products should be allowed, although I don't want to get involved in a GMO debate here in the Parliament. But in this particular context, it is something that has to be thought about in order to get a handle on these issues. Everything has changed. This is the most brutal challenge that this continent has faced in the last 50 years. And we have to find the appropriate responses to deal with it. And I think that is basically the way the challenges ahead of us lie. We have to put our party divisions behind us and try to find a common solution to help people in a humanitarian way, to give them some prospects, so as we, as a continent, can stay together and afloat. That's the situation we're in. And I hope we can get a grip on the situation very soon, and that means all countries getting a grip on it. The Great Britain, for example, I don't really understand in this. If you see how Lebanon are dealing with 1.5 million refugees, I can't understand a country like Poland having 7,000. In my small mind, that doesn't really equate. I have to say that those people who have shown utmost commitment to upstanding and upholding their Christian values in Europe, perhaps they need to think about what Christianity means. The Bible says that you have to show empathy to your neighbours, and it doesn't say what nationality or religion they should be. And also in the basic law, German constitution, it says the dignity of humankind is sacrosanct, and that's the overriding principle we should adopt as Christians and as Europeans. We have to make this our guiding principle. Thank you.